Welcome back. This will be our fourth reading of the Haunted Pendant, and tonight we'll be doing chapters 14 through 18. Um, Time allowed. I think that we managed to make it through that many, though, and I am so glad to see everybody back. It's been a busy few weeks, and a busy couple weeks. I've been working really hard working on my Shot of Midlife Magic book, the third one, and called Zombie Punches. Pirate zombie women, gotta love it. And I'm also working on Soul Keeper, which is part of my Southern Souls Soul Hunter series. It's urban fantasy, and it will be out in the next week or so. So, without further ado, let's get reading. Okay, chapter 14. As James had promised, my phone dinged a few minutes later with a text that listed the women's names, addresses, and a brief description. He said, "You may not have to look them up individually, though. They're all members of the Marauders Bay Pirate Festival Committee, and there's a meeting tomorrow morning." "Can we afford to wait till morning?" I asked Sybil as we went inside. "I mean, if she really is a serial killer, do we want her parading around alone?" "Let me see the messages," Sybil said once we were in the parlor. I handed her my phone. "It says here that they all live alone. I'll put eyes on them for the night. The three of you go get some rest, but first, I want to teach you a binding spell." "We know a few binding spells," Eli said, reaching over and taking a cookie off the plate that Luther had set on the coffee table earlier. "What are you trying to bind?" Sybil glanced at him over the top of her readers as she pulled a piece of stationery from a side table drawer, her expression wry. "The soul to a body? Know any of those?" "Oh," he said with an incorrigible grin. "Nope, fresh out of those. Proceed." "Thanks," she said with an exasperated sigh. "All I was waiting on was your permission." I got the feeling we were on the verge of wearing out our welcome. "Thank you for all your help, Sybil. I know it's not your mess, and you obviously value your privacy." She waved a delicate hand. "I do bear some responsibility for what's going on. I should have made sure those cackling fools dealt with this 3.5 centuries ago. I didn't, so here we are. You likely won't need my help with all of them, but when you do, I'll be here." After scribbling out 3 different notes, she handed one to each of us. The spell was in Latin, and her handwriting was neat and flowing, reminiscent of my grandmother's. People just didn't have penmanship like that anymore. "Can you read it, and do you understand it?" she asked, and all 3 of us nodded. My father had been a stickler for languages and had made sure all of us had at least a passing knowledge of Latin. Each of us had also followed it up with courses in college. It was hard to study much history without knowing the language, and knowing it had made other languages easier. "If you find her, use the spell first, then call me immediately. We'll do it right the next time." "You said you were going to put eyes on them," Jake said, reading the spell before stuffing it in his pocket. "What does that mean?" Sybil's lips turned up in an enigmatic smile. "A girl can't tell all her secrets, now can she?" I shook my head. At least she was interesting. "Come on, kids," I said when my stomach rumbled for the 3rd time. "It's almost dark, and I'm starving." Jake and Eli rose from the couch at the same time I did. Luther had disappeared into the back of the house as soon as we'd arrived, and I was a little disappointed when he didn't come to see us off. Exhaustion slammed into me as soon as I settled in the driver's seat of my car, and I yawned. "Knock it off," Eli said, covering his mouth as he yawned too. "We still have work to do, so there's no need of even thinking about going to sleep yet." "Before we do anything," Jake replied, trying to get comfortable in my minuscule backseat. We're going to get something to eat. My belly thinks my throat's been cut. I engaged the clutch and pushed the start button, and the same little thrill as always rushed through me when my car roared to life. This time, though, I was thankful for a fast car, mainly because it would haul me to the Jolly Roger, the nearest food source, 100 times faster than I could walk. To the Jolly Roger, then, I said, curving around the circular drive and toward the main road. I was happy to see the driveway was still clear and smooth, and didn't waste any time putting Sybil's house behind us. Do you think the Jolly Roger's the best place to go? Eli asked. I say we grab a pizza and go back to the manor. We need to go through this book tonight, so we need quiet. Plus, probably wouldn't hurt to talk to the fam. As much as I'd kill for a basket of wings and fries right now, I think he's right, Jake said. We don't have any time to waste, and we don't even know what we're looking for yet, let alone whether we have the power and resources to do it. We need to study that book. I groaned, but they were right. Even with the muffling spell, we'd never get anything done at the Jolly Roger. I sighed and flicked my blinker on, taking a left toward the estate rather than a right toward town. Call Rowdy's and order a pizza then. We'll grab it on the way. Just in case we weren't the only ones who hadn't eaten, we ordered an extra pie. My family likes to eat, and Jules, a wonderful witch who'd worked for us for way longer than I could remember, always took Wednesdays and Saturdays off. That meant we were on our own, and it was almost a guarantee that nobody had cooked. Mom likes to organize dinners, but she didn't know the first thing about cooking them. Eli made the call, and it wasn't 5 minutes later that the subject I was hoping to avoid came up. So what do you think's up with Luther? Jake asked, leaning up between our seats. Do you think he's like her paramour or something? I snorted. Paramour? Really? Is that even a word anymore? Though I certainly wouldn't blame her. He was a fine form, at least when he wasn't playing Grandpa Munster. Absolutely, Eli said, turning as sideways as he could in my bucket seats. But I think he's a shapeshifter. She's enchanted with her witchy wiles. Enchanted with her witchy wiles? I asked, smiling. Really, you read way too many shifter romances. Isn't it usually the other way around? Isn't it the woman who gets entranced and falls in love with the shifter? He cocked a brow and huffed a breath out through his nose. I don't know what you've been reading, but they're definitely not the same ones on my reader. Though I do have to say, he seems to be making some Google eyes at you, Sage, Jake said, nudging my shoulder. When James got huffy and called you weird, it seemed to me he took it personally. My cheeks warmed. He did not. He was just irritated that we were dealing with a non-magical skeptic. He's obviously been around much longer than we have, so he's had that many more years to get tired of intolerance. Nah, Eli said, enjoying my discomfort. He thinks you're hot. He does not. My mind drifted back to the way he and Sybil had interacted at the Hennessy's house. They obviously had some sort of close relationship, and I don't think it's just a companion situation. They're familiar with each other in a way that friends aren't. You and Eli are familiar like that, Jake reminded me. Yeah, but that's different. Eli's like my extremely irritating little brother. I resent that, Eli said, drawing his brows down. If anybody in this relationship is irritating, it's you. You're lucky to have me. I raised a brow at him. You pinched me right in front of them. So, you elbowed me. Yeah, but you deserved it. Okay, Jake said, raising his voice to drown us out. I think I've made my point here. Maybe, I said, but I still think there's more than just friendship there. I was saved from further conversation by the flash of a green and orange neon lights ahead in the shape of a giant pizza wedge. My stomach would have made Pavlov proud with the depth of its rumble, and my mouth watered right on cue. I'll run in, Eli said, pushing the door open as soon as I'd rolled to a stop. While he was inside, Jake nudged me again. Oh no, it wasn't easy to call James. Are you okay? I pulled in a deep breath and let it out. I wasn't sure how I felt. I guess. It was weird, but it's not like I haven't seen him around since the breakup. And he's dating that Amy girl from the donut shop. Actually, he's not, Jake replied. They broke up. I was just in there the other day and overheard her telling her coworker about it. She was pretty mad. Apparently, he's hung up on someone else. There you go, then, I replied. He's already found somebody to replace her. No, you dingbat. I think he's still hung up on you. I scoffed. Yeah, he's been carrying a 5-year flame for a woman he thinks is a freak show. Maybe that's lust rather than disgust that curls his nose every time he sees me. He wouldn't give me the time of day if I turned him into a clock. Maybe, he said. I don't think for a minute you should get back with him, but I do think if you're going to be working with him, you need to know where his mind's at. He may not like you. He's probably a little scared of you, but I don't think he's over you either. Just be careful. Fabulous, because I didn't have enough complications in my life. Why couldn't we just go back to the day before, skip the dive like we should have the minute Eli got a bad feeling, and get on with our almost normal lives? Because nothing is ever that easy. That's why. Okay. End of that chapter. Who do we got? Oh, hey, Blue. Mike, welcome in. Nice to see everybody. I hope you're enjoying the reading so far. And since we don't have any questions, I'm just going to go right back to reading if that's okay. I really am glad you guys showed up, though. It's nice to see you. Okay, on to chapter 15. Do I smell pizza? Willow was the first to pop her head into the kitchen when we got home. I hadn't even had time to text Mom or Connell before she grabbed a slice out of the box and plopped down beside me. No offense, but if you're still sick, keep your cooties away from me, I said. And after I tell you about our day, you'll understand why I don't need a cold on top of everything else. You never get sick, she said. She does. She doesn't, but I do, Eli said, brow raised. So please, keep her space cootie free. Mom and Connell must have heard us, or smelled the pizza, because they showed up right then. My mom was angelic. There was no other way to describe her, and Willow looked just like her, right down to the smattering of freckles across her nose. Both were small, with golden hair and bright blue eyes. Whereas I'd inherited Dad's height and angular features, theirs were delicate and feminine. Sometimes I was a little jealous of how pretty and feminine they both were, but for the most part, I was happy to be tall and sturdy. Though they were both small, they were mighty. Both had wicked magic and the power of the goddess in her soul, and they both had wicked tempers that were in direct opposition to those angelic looks. The rest of us may have towered over them, but they never gave an inch. As if to prove my words, my mom elbowed around Connell and snatched the last piece of sausage and pepperoni from the box, almost right out of his hands. Smirking, she slid it onto a plate and grabbed a Coke from the fridge. You snooze, you lose. Anyone else? She passed around sodas, then after everybody had a full plate, she took a seat at the oval oak table. Connell turned to me. Did you get the problem with the trunk resolved? What problem with what trunk? Mom asked before sinking her teeth into her slice. Before we could answer, Axel, who had a nose that would put any bloodhound to shame, scurried in and jumped up on the table to grab a slice of pizza. Where's the ground beef? He asked, his whiskers twitching with displeasure. Ground beef goes on a bun, not on a pizza, I said. Besides, that's not the important question. Where were you all day? He took a slice of pizza from the box and stuffed a quarter of it into his mouth. I was busy, he said with a full mouth. Busy doing what? Eli asked. Doesn't matter, he replied, reaching for my soda. When I went to the shop and you weren't there, I left. Stopped in here and Will said you'd gone to Sybil Blackburn's. I'm not going within a mile of that place. What'd you learn? I swatted at his paw. He was terrible about stealing drinks because he knew that once he'd slobbered in it, nobody else would drink after him. We were just getting to that. Eli, Jake, and I took turns telling the story from the point of discovering the trunk to leaving Sybil's. I always liked Sybil, Mom said, wiping her fingers on her napkin. She keeps to herself, but when she does decide to come out, she's quite the personality. You're lucky she decided to help you. Honestly, I'm surprised though. Maybe not as much as I would be if she hadn't had some small hand in it to begin with. She's always had a defined sense of right and wrong. It doesn't always line up with the traditional concepts, but her moral compass is in fine working order. She's one of the most powerful witches I've ever known. So you know her, huh? Eli asked, his expression shrewd. Yeah, I've known her for what seems like forever, Mom replied, dipping her last bite of crust into garlic butter. Why? What's the deal with Luther? He asked, leave it to him to jump to the gossip before we hashed out what to do about the colonial psycho on the loose. A small smile curved Mom's lips. Ah, Luther. He's still around, is he? He is, I said, curious despite myself. And he was an ancient butler when we first met him. Mom lifted his shoulder. I don't know if I'd call him ancient, but it's fair to say that if he were to appear as a human his actual age, he'd resemble the Crypt Keeper. I had a hard time picturing him like that, even though I'd seen a close version. So which version of him is real? Jake asked. Old man or young soap star? Mom gave that weird smile again. Both, I suppose. Neither? His story is his own. If you want to know it, you'll have to ask him. It's not mine to tell. I scowled at her. It's not fair. Yeah, Eli said, his expression no doubt mirroring my own. Dish. Nope, Mom replied, tossing her napkin onto her plate, then rising and collecting ours too. That's his business, and Sybil's business, I suppose. That made me even more curious, but Mom was as stubborn as the rest of us. That's where we all got it from. When she sealed her lips, nothing was going to pry them open. She tossed our plates and the empty pizza boxes in the trash and rejoined us. Now, let's see that book. Eli handed it to her and gave her a few minutes to look it over. Like all of us, she had a couple areas of expertise, one of which was ancient texts. She was an avid reader and a history buff, so her interest had drawn her to ancient texts. Axel settled in her lap and examined it too. That's some serious voodoo there, he said. You can read it? Jake asked before I could. Axel gave him a duh look. Of course, or at least enough to understand you got your work cut out for you. You're going to need someone experienced to deal with some of them. Setting aside the curious fact that a skunk could read a scrambled version of the Honorian alphabet, I asked the obvious question. How bad is it? Pretty bad, Mom said as Connell pulled the book closer to him. He shook his head after flipping through a few pages. It's beyond me. The pictures create some interesting possibilities, though. How can an old bed warmer possibly do any harm? I mean, I get the jewelry because people still wear it, but that's not going to do much more than hang on a wall. It's low priority. Or not, Eli said. There are a lot of reenactments around here, especially during the Pirate Festival. You never know. Connell rolled his eyes. I'm pretty sure they're not going to go so far as to actually use a bed warmer, especially now. It's the middle of summer in Florida. You'd roast. Mom had flipped back to that page. That's exactly what they do. Come again, Jake said, brow raised. The curse on it is that the minute it's filled with coals, it's almost like hellfire, Mom told him. It gets so hot that it would pretty much incinerate anything it touches. Lovely, I said, and now somebody in this town has it. Yep, she said, a troubled frown creasing her brow. And the snuff box is poison. I can't imagine anybody actually using it for its original purpose, but that doesn't really matter. Anything that goes in it becomes toxic. A whole litany of potential tragedies crossed my mind. Mom and Axel were quiet for a few minutes as they read, and I could tell everybody else at the table was as impatient as I was. What else? Well, it seems that whoever cursed the items put a failsafe, so to speak, on many of them. Not all of them, but enough to maybe give us some wiggle room before the curses are activated. Also, they're not all lethal. This one, for instance, she said, pointing to the pocket watch, is cursed to punish anybody who puts work time above really important things in life. So it goes to somebody who rolls with the punches and appreciates what they have. The curse won't activate? Eli asked. Exactly, Axel said with a nod. But the odds of that happening are 50-50 at best. No one knows how to look up from their phones anymore. Still, Jake replied, glass half full. We may have time on that one. So we have a bed warmer that incinerates people, a necklace that held the vengeful spirit of an elitist colonial serial killer, and a watch that punishes the wearer for taking the good things in life for granted. We need to find a way to prioritize them. Connell nodded his head. Agreed. And we need to make an initial push to find as many as we can. Flyers, posts on our website, and in the Marauder. The Marauder was our local paper. Unlike most papers, it still had a decent following, even with hard copies. That's not a horrible idea, Eli said. All we have are drawings, but we can add descriptions and say the items were sold accidentally. Offer a reward on top of refund for their return. It could work for some of them, Mom replied. Some people will go with greed over goodwill and believe the item is more valuable if you want it back. But I think most people in town are decent. Even if we only get one back, that's one less than we have to hunt down. And one less we have to worry about, I said. The pizza had turned to a hard lump in my stomach. I had a feeling we were going to see a lot of bad things happen before everything was said and done. All right, that's the end of chapter 15. Hey, Marcy from Antigua. Boy, I bet you're having nice weather down there right now. It's starting to get chilly up here at night. Hey, Jen. Michael O'Brien, hello to you. Well, it's nice to see people jumping in. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. Have you guys, I know I see a few familiar faces, but have you guys read this series, or is this the first time hearing of it? Mike, you pursuer of independent thought. I know you've read it, or I think you have, right? Oh, Marcy. Yeah, I'm kind of jealous. I would love to come down your direction. Eventually, I'll get down there one of these days. That's my dream, a Caribbean vacation and hitting all the Beach Boy places. I know, Mike, and I appreciate you. Mike I think he's been with me since the very, very beginning, since I published my first book. He's been with me, and you've supported me, and you're just, I can't even tell you how much I appreciate you. All right, well, let's get on to chapter 16. We spent the next few hours going through the book and prioritizing the items as best we could. There were 43 items in total, and about 20 of them were high priority. All of them were bad, but it was obvious that some of the Romani had been angrier than others, or at least more vindictive. To be fair, though, most of the bad ones had fail-safes that made the triggers user-specific, so that was something anyway. I tossed and turned most of the night, so when I got up the next morning, it was safe to say a bear would have been more pleasant. Morning, sunshine, Connell said when I shuffled into the dining room. I glared at him as I poured a cup of coffee. Jules knew just how to make it, strong, and I wasn't sociable before I had at least a half a cup, even on a good day. I added a dollop of cream and sugar, then plucked a bagel and some grapes from the sideboard. Good job not putting good in front of that, I grumbled. He grinned, and I hated him a little because he was already dressed and ready for the day. His dark hair was still damp, and he was freshly shaven. Do you just wake up looking like that? I asked, slathering some honey almond cream cheese on my bagel before taking a seat beside him. No, but I dare say I don't wake up with half my hair plastered to my head and the other half standing straight up. Nice slippers, by the way, he said with a pointed glance at the stuffed Pikachus sitting atop my feet. Thanks, I replied. Now I know what to get you for Christmas. Pass, he said, though it would be an improvement over the foul cologne you got me last year. That was supposed to have pheromones in it, I said, scratching my head as I sat down. And I thought it smelled nice. Maybe you just don't know what the girl's like. I don't think I'd want to attract a girl who thought that smelled good, he replied, nose scrunched. He pushed the drawing pad toward me. I did my best to copy some of the high priority pictures from the books. They're not as good as Marshall could have done, but if you type up quick descriptions for each and add a chunky reward to them, I'll bet you'll get at least a few of them back. Thanks, I said, pulling the notebook toward me. Marshall was the artist in the family, which was why art was his area of expertise. Still, these were good. I'll take them down to the paper this morning. If I hand them straight to Miss Marilyn, she's way more likely to put them in. Miss Marilyn was the lady who oversaw the Marauder. She'd run a tight ship there for 5 decades, which was probably why the paper still did so well. Not a word was published without her say-so, and an order from her was like a command from the Almighty. What she said went. Who, what, and where? Eli asked, cruising into the dining room, looking fresh as a daisy in his khaki shorts and a black tank top that had a smiling pirate skull set in the middle of a circle of text that said Captain Sarcasm. I hated him a little too, but at least some of the caffeine in my system took the edge off. He'd been a morning person all his life. It was one of the few areas where we differed. It was a wonder one of us hadn't killed the other, because my reticence to get an early start irritated him as much as his chipper, smiling morning face did me. Are you wearing that to the meeting? I asked. Of course I am, he said, plucking a strawberry from the fruit platter and popping it into his mouth. It's a meeting about a pirate festival. I think it's perfect. I couldn't argue with that logic, not that my brain was operating at a high enough capacity to do so even if I'd wanted to. He filled a coffee cup and buttered a croissant, then joined us. I pushed the drawings toward him. If we get descriptions and a reward added, we can run them down to the paper. I'll do that while you get dressed, he said with a pointed look. We can do it on the way to the live meeting. I glanced at my phone. We had a little over an hour before it started, and I wanted to be there early. I was holding out hope that one of the women who would be so obvious that it would just be a matter of nabbing her after the meeting, but I doubted that'd be the case. My luck just didn't run that way. How are we going to kidnap a woman in broad daylight? I asked, then couldn't believe what my life had come to, that such a sentence had even crossed my lips. You'll distract the others and lure her away, and I'll knock her out, Eli said. Easy peasy. You can't just knock her over the head, I said, popping a grape into my mouth. We have to keep some kind of high ground here. Eli rolled his eyes. Magically knock her out, dingbat. I'm not just going to clock her on the ground. I know you don't want to hear this, Connell said, pouring more syrup on his Belgian waffle, but now might be a good time for you to climb inside her noggin. If you're steering, you can just make her get in the car. Eli had the power of persuasion, and he hated it. He wouldn't even use it on the twins, and that was saying something. We'd first learned about it in the 8th grade, when he'd made a football player who was bullying him punch himself in the face. It had been both funny and terrifying, and he'd gone straight home to demand answers from his mother. He'd never known anything about his father other than that the man had left when he learned his mom was pregnant, but Sophia had admitted that Eli had gotten a gift, if you could call it that, from him. No, he said, steel in his voice, that's not an option. Besides that, I said, she's not the only one in there, remember? She's sharing headspace with a dead chick. We don't even know if it would work, or if, God's forbid, Prudence could use the mental link to jump into Eli. We're not risking it, even if he's willing to do it. Which I'm not, he added in a tone that said the discussion was over. I concur, Jake said as he ambled into the room. Like me, he was still in his pajamas, though he did look like he'd taken the time to at least splash water on his face. If Sage distracts the others, there's no reason why we can't draw whichever one of them is possessed away from the crowd and nab her. It's settled then. Eli, my laptop is in the parlor. You do the descriptions while Jake and I get ready. I popped the last bite of my bagel into my mouth, then rose from the table and filled my coffee cup so I'd have an extra dose of caffeine to sip on while I made myself fit for the public consumption. 20 minutes later, I felt a little more human, or at least ready to take on a spiteful spirit. We were just leaving when a vintage red Mustang convertible pulled up behind my car, its younger, sleeker little sister. I had a hard time deciding which I liked better, but loyalty to mine, along with the fact that it had air conditioning, won the day. Still, the car was sharp, though not as sharp as its driver. Luther shut off the engine and unfolded his long frame from the driver's seat. Where's Sybil? I asked. He grinned, and my heart gave a little stutter. His strong chin had just enough stubble to make him look rugged, and though I had hated to admit it, he looked great in the mint green polo and faded jeans he was wearing. Good morning to you, too, he said, and my face warmed. That had been a little rude. I'm sorry. I'm still getting caffeinated, I said, returning his smile. Good morning. Good morning, Eli said, jumping in. Now where's Sybil? She had some other business to take care of, but I came to help. She said she'd be at the house waiting once we figured out who Prudence is possessing and captured her. She didn't trust us to do it? Jake asked. You didn't have to come all this way for a simple abduction. Again, not something I ever expected to hear in a serious discussion, but apparently that was my life now. I was just glad the pendant was the only artifact listed with that particular curse. Kidnapping was not something I was wanting to make a habit out of. Nobody looked good in prison orange, and I suspected honey almond cream cheese wasn't on the menu there either. She did trust you. To be honest, I'm just curious about the town. I haven't been out and about much, and I'd like to see how it's changed since the last time I was here. Ah, an opportunity for me to be nosy. Eli beat me to the punch, though. How long's it been since you saw it? He asked. Luther smiled, but shook his head. A while. Long enough that I'm sure plenty has changed. Maybe not as much as you think, I said, heading to my car. Let's take mine, he said. Unless you're going to let me drive, there's no way any of us can fit comfortably in that back seat. Besides, it's a beautiful day to be in a convertible. I disagreed there because as far as I was concerned, there was no such day. When it was hot, I wanted air conditioning. And we were in the time of year that hot was understating it. Even when the weather was nice, I hated riding in a convertible because my hair was constantly blowing in my face, and it was next to impossible to brush out the tangles later. I have an even better idea, Jake said. Let's take mine. Since we're kidnapping somebody, it might be better to be in something a little less flashy, a little more spacious than either of yours. Good call, Eli said, then pivoted toward Jake's pewter SUV. It was the description of nondescript. Shotgun. That meant I was in the back seat with Luther, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I did my best to sit up straight so that the bagel and quart of grapes I'd eaten for breakfast didn't pooch my gut out like I was 4 months pregnant. I buckled up, giving him a smile as I did. In the 30 seconds it took us to reach the end of the drive, I'd shifted my weight 3 times and couldn't quite seem to figure out where to put my hands. I frowned and settled on folding them in my lap. I was a little irritated at myself because I wasn't used to not being comfortable in my own skin. I cast a quick glance at him from the corner of my eye and was disgruntled by the amused smile he wasn't even trying to hide. Relax, he said. I don't bite. Are you sure? Eli asked, twisting around in his seat. Because that smile looks a little wolfy to me. Luther laughed. Oh, believe me, when I'm being wolfy, you'll know it. I would have sworn his green eyes flashed with a hint of gold for a minute, but it had to have been a trick of the light. Eli arched a brow at me, but turned back around in his seat. Luther took pity on us and changed the subject. What's in the folder? Eli handed it to him. Their older brother Connell drew some pics of the worst artifacts in the book, and I copied the descriptions of them. We're going to post them in the paper along with a hefty reward for their return. Hopefully we'll get some back the easy way, he said. I'll upload all of them to our website too. Luther looked through the pages and nodded. Not bad. It's a good idea. Even if you get one back, that's one less you have to find. Or wait for, I added under my breath. It had occurred to me that the only way we were going to get some of them back was after the curse had been triggered. How did you prioritize them? Luther asked. By the ones that did the most harm, then we cross-categorized them with the ones that don't have triggers, Eli explained, taking the folder back. What do you mean, triggers? Luther asked, dark brown eyes drawn down in confusion. We told him what Mom had found, and he nodded, his expression thoughtful. That matches up with what Sybil said about him being good people, Luther said. I can't say that I blame them entirely for what they did. It was wrong, but I also have a feeling they didn't intend for the articles to show up over 3 centuries later to hurt innocent people. I'd thought of the same thing. More than that, I'd been grateful for it. Without those fail-safes, we'd be buried under dead or otherwise cursed citizens. It would have been so much easier if we lived in a magical community and could just make the announcement outright, but that wasn't our reality. My phone rang, breaking through my musings. When I saw it was James, I wanted nothing more than to swipe it to voicemail. I hadn't had time to process dealing with him yet, and I didn't want to have another conversation with him in front of strangers, especially Luther. He'd had an odd reaction to him the day before, and I didn't feel like I had the mental energy to invest right then. Still, James might have information we needed. You gonna get that? Luther asked, tilting his head toward the phone. I suppose so, I said, then answered. I did not, however, put it on speakerphone. Hello? I said, trying to be as chill as James had been the day before. The truth was that I had cared about him, and it had hurt when he'd rejected me. The anger had long since faded, but the hurt hadn't, and neither had the guilt. Hey, Sage, it's James. Listen, I've been thinking. I reviewed the paperwork from the Hennessy's, and I gotta say, I'm confused. I don't understand any of it. And if, like you say, I'm gonna be facing more of this, then I think we need to finally have that talk. Can you meet me for coffee? Just you? I don't want to deal with Eli or your brother staring at me like I'm the jerk of the year while I'm trying my best to keep an open mind. I would have liked to say that wasn't fair, but that's probably how it would have gone down. Okay, I said, I'm on my way to the meeting now. How about this afternoon? Say 2. 2 works. Sadie's? That was the local coffee shop. The coffee was only so-so, but the place was private. Sadie's will be great. See you then. I pulled my phone away from my ear and disconnected. What do you want? Eli asked, his tone making it clear what he thought. Either that or he was smelling something dead. My money was on the former. He wants answers, I replied, the weight of that settling on my shoulders. He says if we're going to work together, he wants to understand. Oh, so now that it affects his job, he wants to know all about you, Jake said, scowling at me over his shoulder. You should have told him to piss off. Yeah, maybe, I said, rubbing my temples, but we're probably going to need him. I can't imagine we're going to be able to fly under the radar, and when our names start showing up in connection to weird crap, it'll be best if he's on our side. Luther hadn't said anything like he had yesterday, and I was glad. This was none of his business. I didn't even like talking about it this much in front of him. Eli turned in his seat. I'll go with you, Shmoo. That was a pet name he only broke out when he was trying to comfort me. I gave him a small smile. Thanks, but he asked that I come alone. He thought maybe you two would be a tad hostile. Luther finally spoke up. Looks like he called that one right at least. You don't have to, you know. We can work around it. I wasn't sure why he was using the word we, considering we'd only known each other for a whole 24 hours, but whatever. It's fine, I said, sighing. We need to clear the air anyway. It's been too long. That was true. I thought I'd pushed past the whole ball of leftover emotions created by our disastrous parting, but I obviously hadn't. It'd be good to put the hard feelings to rest, or at least say what I'd tried to back then, that I was sorry. And maybe he'd say it too, because I wasn't the only one at fault. Jake stopped at an intersection, then hung a right toward the newspaper office. Are you going in? I asked Jake and Luther once the vehicle was stopped. Nah, I'll wait here, Jake said, but Luther opened the door. I'd love to go in and see how much the process has changed, he said. Newspapers have always fascinated me. I laughed as I climbed out. It's not like you can see the printing process. I paused and thought for a minute. I wasn't exactly an expert on the news delivery industry. I'm not even sure they have a printing press anymore. Maybe it's all done on a computer. The look on his face was priceless. Modern technology is savage. The printing press was one of the greatest adventures of all time, along with the telegraph. It connected the world in a way no other invention ever has. I laughed and pulled my smartphone from my pocket and wiggled it at him. I can look at whatever newspaper I want in about 3 seconds while looking at cute cat memes, listening to music, and texting somebody. He pressed his lips together and shook his head. A lock of raven hair fell over his forehead, softening his rough and tumble look. Written communication is a lost art. When was the last time you hand wrote a letter or even a postcard? I thought for a minute. I signed Dad's birthday card last month. Does that count? Savage, he repeated, then opened the door to the Marauder's front office and waited while Eli and I preceded him in. That made me even more curious about his history, though I still didn't have the nerves to ask him flat out what his deal was. Eli, a short, rotund woman with curly hair, said as she waddled around the counter, her white orthopedic shoes squeaking on the gray wood grain laminate. Miss Marilyn, he bent down to give her an enthusiastic hug. You look ravishing as always. She preened and patted her hair, then smoothed her floral dress. Oh, you rascal, talking up an old lady like that. Her expression became admonishing. When are you going to get a haircut? You look so handsome when you're clean cut. Not that you don't now. No, Miss Marilyn, if I cut my hair, how'll everybody know I'm a pirate? He grinned and squeezed her arm. She swatted at him, then turned her periwinkle gaze toward me. Sage, dear, it's good to see you too. How's your mother? I heard she had the flu a few weeks ago. It had actually been a few months ago and had been a minor cold, but snowballs tended to roll downhill quickly in Marauders Bay. I was a little surprised it hadn't gone to the full-fledged plague, but Miss Marilyn was at the top of the gossip chain. She's good, I said, smiling at the matronly woman. She sends her regards and says to say thank you for the pie you sent for Dad's birthday. Pshaw, she said, flapping a blue-veined hand. It was nothing, just a peach pie my mama used to make. Now what brings you two in? You need to place. Her words faded as she caught sight of Luther and she tilted her head. Well, hello, have we met? He stepped forward and bowed over her hand. I'm positive we haven't, ma'am. I'm sure I would have remembered such a lovely woman. We're just here to secure a placement in the paper. A full-page one, if you could. Oh, of course, she said, though she didn't stop looking at him. She returned to her place behind the counter and pulled out a notepad. I know how to use that computer, but I prefer to handwrite it as well. Never hurts to have a backup, especially with the way all this technology goes down all the time. Now, let me see what you want to insert. Eli handed her the ad he'd composed while I was getting dressed. We had a mix-up at the gallery. We'd already sold these items, but when Miss Dilly's men came to pick up items for the auction, they were accidentally boxed up with them. They're important to the gentleman at the bottom because they're family heirlooms and all he has left of his grandparents. The house sold, and he didn't have the money to buy it. Just this stuff. That was my Eli, silver-tongued and slick with a cover story when he needed to be. Oh dear, she said. That's terrible. This Sunday's edition's already gone out, but I can get you in tomorrow's. Will that do? That'd be perfect, I said, smiling as I pulled my wallet from my purse. In fact, can you run it all week? We'd really like to get these pieces back. Of course, and I'll cut you a deal on the cost. That poor man, he deserved to have something to remember his family by. She drew up the bill and made sure she had all the information, then we paid and left. Luther left shortly after his exchange with Miss Maryland, though I hadn't noticed until we went to leave. He and Jake were in a spirited debate about the most historically significant gems when Eli and I climbed back into the SUV. And they continued it for the 5 minutes it took us to drive to the community center where the committee was holding the meeting. That gave my imagination plenty of time to run wild. But I told myself Miss Maryland had seen a lot of handsome faces in her time, so I was probably giving her comment way too much headspace. Still, I didn't like having questions but not answers, and nothing drew me to the flame like a good mystery. How are you guys liking it so far? We're about 2/3, a little over 2/3 of the way through, I think. And I love it. The more I read this, the more I want to go write another book in this series right now. But let's get back to it. I was surprised by how many people were at the meeting. For some reason, I'd had an image of a handful of people arguing over where to put the fish and chips trucks and kiddie games. But that wasn't the case. At least 30 people were mulling around in the parking lot, all of them holding clipboards, laptops, or notebooks. Wait, I said before getting out of the truck. Won't they recognize us? Not if we do this, Luther said as I jumped when he turned into a blond guy about my age. He wore the same outfit, but I'd have never guessed who he was if I hadn't known it. Oh, I said, a little irritated that I hadn't thought of it. We'd all practiced glamour since we were kids, so it should have been the first thing that popped to mind. I blamed my distraction on the dark-haired, or rather blonde now, guy next to me. Eli, Jake, and I followed his lead, then climbed out of the vehicle and strolled toward the group as if we belonged there. It took us a minute to pick the women who'd been at the Hennessy's from the crowd, and by the time we did, a tall blonde woman moved to the long table at the front of the room and called the meeting to order. People shuffled around to find a seat in the rows of chairs set up in front of the table, and two old ladies glared at us when we plopped down where they'd obviously intended to sit. Those seats put us directly behind the three women we were there to see, though, so that they could either like it or lump it. How can we tell? Eli whispered to Luther, who was sitting between us. Listen for her speech pattern, Luther whispered back. There's no way she's adapted her language yet, so she should stand out like a sore thumb. Also, she might appear clumsy because she's probably not used to the body yet either. Women her age and her time didn't tend to be portly like these ladies are. Both good points, but if being clumsy got you exercised, I may as well have grabbed my swimsuit and prepared for the holy water dousing right then and there. I decided to focus on the speech. It was just our luck that the women were good little meeting goers and didn't so much as whisper the entire time the people in front were talking. Instead, they sat and listened to every word being uttered. I shifted my weight and tried not to focus on the fact that Luther's knee was up against mine. I would have moved the chair over a little, but that would have been obvious. I did my level best to think of him in his old man body, wishing that was the form he'd chosen. When that didn't entirely work, I imagined him as a rat shifter, eating old chicken wings out of a dumpster. I chanced a quick glance at him out of the corner of my eye. Though his attention appeared to be laser-focused on the women in front of us, a small smile curved his lips. When the woman up front called for people to break into their subcommittees, I'd never been happier. The three ladies in front of us stood and smoothed their slacks, then picked their purses up off the floor. Dave's over there, the one who'd been walking the bulldog said. He was supposed to get the dimensions of the vendor spaces so we can start assigning spots. The other two nodded and followed her, and we stood and tried to stay with them without appearing obvious. Excuse me, Eli said, tapping the lady who'd been walking the bulldog the day before on the shoulder. I thought I heard you mention vendors. We just arrived from Port Charlotte. We booked a slot for our shrimp po' boy stand, but I forgot the paperwork at home and can't seem to find the email. Can you tell us where we should park? Right now we're in the Walmart parking lot, but they told us we had to leave. It was all I could do to keep my jaw from dropping open. He really was good at coming up with stories. He'd also laid on a layer of light flirtation, which I thought was a little over the top. Apparently they didn't, though. The lady I'd told to call 911, Alicia Sanders, gave him a smile that was closer to a leer. His glamour was attractive, but I didn't think nearly as handsome as his real face was. I rolled my eyes because he fed on it. The woman's hand fluttered to her throat, and it was all I could do not to roll my eyes. You can park it in a lot over on the other side of the quick stop, she said, laying her hand on his arm. That's where most vendors are. Thank you so much, I said, stepping forward and addressing Sandy Adams, the one who'd been walking the bulldog. I just love that scarf. Where'd you get it? Because I didn't like to be insincere and tried in reality to give one honest compliment to a stranger a day, I infused warmth into my tone. A smile was free after all. Oh, thanks, she said, beaming. My mother got it for me for my birthday. It's my favorite one. She wasn't the one. Her speech pattern was too modern. It's great, I replied, keeping my smile in place despite my disappointment. That was two down. The third lady turned and hustled away before we could say anything to her. Was it something we said? Jake asked, trying to keep his tone light. Oh, don't mind her, Sandy said, flapping her hand. She's been like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs today. I don't know what's gotten under her skin, but she's rushed off like that more than once just since breakfast. She even knocked her coffee over at breakfast and had to run home to change before we came here. That sounded closer to what we were looking for. You ladies have a nice day, I rushed to say, trying to keep an eye on the woman as she weaved through the roomful of people. You too, Alicia said, though she had eyes only for Eli. I was definitely going to tease him about that later. She went out the back door, Jake said as we weaved in between people. By the time we pushed through, she was halfway across the parking lot. I got this, Luther said, then quickened his pace to a jog. As long as his legs were, it didn't take him but a few seconds to catch her. We weren't far behind. Excuse me, he said, moving around in front of the woman. What do you want? She asked, her gaze shifting nervously. She tried to step around him. He took her by her upper arms and stared into her eyes. I want to know who you are, he said, and his voice had a honeyed quality that even made me feel a little lethargic. For some reason, I took a couple of steps toward him. Marianne Phillips, she said. My name is Marianne Phillips. He didn't break eye contact. And where are you rushing off to, Marianne? Her arms were slack against her body, and she didn't seem to be able to look away from him. Her voice was faint. To meet a man. I met him on a dating website, and he said he'd meet me here. I don't want Sandy and Alicia to know. Luther held her gaze for a few more seconds, and she swayed a little as her knees sagged. That's enough, Eli snapped, then moved forward to put himself between Marianne and Luther. He straightened his spine and looked Luther dead in the eyes. You got what you wanted. You're done. Marianne shuddered and turned to look at the rest of us, her eyes wide. Who are you people? What do you want? It's okay, I said, moving toward her with my palms out. We thought you were somebody else. We're sorry. Please, have a good day. She scurried off, glancing over her shoulder every few strides until she was to the street. We're leaving, Eli said, then strode toward the truck without looking back. The tension in the vehicle was palpable once we were all in there. What do you think you were doing? Eli asked, turning toward Luther. He'd put me in the front seat. I had to be sure, Luther said, his expression unperturbed. Eli, on the other hand, was about to pop his cork. You were sure after she spoke 2 full sentences? What was that crap at the end? She almost passed out. That was nothing, Luther replied. Like I said, I had to be sure. This isn't the time, guys, Jake said. We have a bigger problem. We just cleared the only 3 people at that scene. We still don't know where Prudence is, and she's had all night and most of the morning to get a solid grip on whatever body she's stolen. He shifted the rear view a little so he could see Luther. Are you sure she jumped bodies? Luther nodded, but I answered. I talked to Melanie after she went through the window. Prudence wasn't there. Silence fell as we thought. Wait a second, I said, remembering the last moments I was with her. The ladies weren't the only people there. Yeah, they were, Jake said. I was the first one out the door. They were still on the sidewalk. They were the only people in sight. I shook my head. No, there was a man. He said he was a doctor. I tried to remember what he'd said. No, actually, he just used the word physician. I didn't even really pick up on it until now. Something wasn't right when James told me her leg didn't have my belt on it, but we moved away from this subject and I haven't really had time to think on it again. Luther sighed. That was her. She was smart enough to keep her speech short, so you didn't pick up on it. Why'd she come back, though? He raised a brow at me. The missing tourniquet? Holy crap, Eli said, his anger for a moment before shoved aside. She went back to kill Melanie. Luther dipped his head. She did. Thankfully, she doesn't have any knowledge of modern medicine, and assumed that bleeding alone would do it. I shudder to think what she would have done if she'd known about IVs and transfusions. I hate to point out the obvious, Jake said, not taking his eyes off the road, but we have no idea who this guy is. He could be anybody. Eli twisted in his seat. I know you don't want to, but you're going to have to call James again, Sage. No, Luther said, his tone sharp. We'll figure it out. This town's small. We can do an internet search. For what? I asked. Doctors? The guy probably wasn't even a doctor. She probably just made that up. The dog, Jake said, whipping his head around to look at it. What dog? I asked, confused. The bulldog? Jake shook his head. No, Luther almost ran over a Great Dane when we were leaving the Hennessy's. So? Eli asked. Oh, I said as it clicked. The dog probably belonged to somebody, and if our 3 women and the man were the only people there, it was probably the man's. So if we find the dog, we find Prudence. Bingo, Jake said. I'm just not sure how the rest of us didn't see him. I shrugged. Aside from Sybil, you might have all been in the car already. He showed up right before she yelled for me to get a move on. I pulled up the information James had sent me and scrolled until I found Pete Hennessy's number. Who you calling? Eli asked. Pete Hennessy, I replied as the phone rang. Jake glanced at me over his shoulder. But he won't know who you are. He doesn't have to, I said. He left his number with Willow in case we found any more jewelry, like the pendant. Before they could say anything else, Pete answered and I put him on speaker. Hi, Mr. Hennessy. This is Sage Parker from Parker's Gallery. You left your number with us in case we found any unusual rubies. I was calling to see if you were still interested. Maybe, but not right now, he replied. We've had a family emergency, so jewelry shopping is sort of at the bottom of my list. Oh, I said, grasping to find another way to get the info from him. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope everything's okay. It's been a little crazy here, too. My sister was bitten by a Great Dane this morning. His owner dropped his leash, and the dog bit her when she tried to grab it. Eli raised his brows and pressed his lips together, then gave me a nod of approval. He wasn't the only one who could cook things up on the fly. That's terrible, he said. Our next door neighbors have a Great Dane, and he's one of the most lovable dogs I've ever met. John and Sarah just love him. They say he's great company. Oh, then I guess this was just an example of a bad apple then. I'll be sure to tell my sister that, I replied. Did your emergency resolve? I really wanted to know how Melanie was doing. Sort of, he said. It's all a bit convoluted, but my wife's pulling through, so that's all that really matters. Excellent, I replied, truly grateful she was going to be okay. We look forward to seeing you when things settle down then. We said our goodbyes and I hung up. So now all we need to do is find where James lives. He said it was his next door neighbor, so that narrows it down. Jake turned the SUV around and headed back toward the Hennessy's, while I crossed my fingers and hoped that we were right. Okay, that's the end of chapter 17. I'll start at chapter 18 next week. I haven't checked my schedule, but I think I have next Wednesday free. So, yeah, well, I'll do another reading. We should be getting pretty close to finishing it up. I think next week might get us there. So, I don't know why I take my glasses off, except they hurt the back of my ears sometimes. Hey, Mary. I'm I'm glad you enjoyed the reading, and it's absolutely my pleasure. I love sitting here doing this. Does anybody else have any more questions, or is there something? Oh, I put up a poll to see which book you guys would like narrated left. We have 2 Enchanted Coasts left, and I think we just uploaded the last Corey. I don't think there's another one of those yet. So I'm going to have to start narrating some of them. And I did put a poll up asking whether or not, which one you guys would like to see next. And right now it's kind of a tie between Keyhole and Corey. So if you want to go over and check it out. Oh, hey, Mike. You have a wonderful week too. And I'm glad. Thanks a lot for stopping in. I appreciate it. Oh, good always is talking to you. So yeah, if you guys want to pop over and do the poll or put in here what you prefer to see, I, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give it a hand narrating myself. It'll be fun if nothing else. I've already started doing a couple of them, but I'm also trying to get Soul Keeper and Zombie Punches finished. So a lot going on, and it takes a whole lot longer to edit them when I'm narrating them than I thought it would. Because I'm trying to do it as perfectly as I can. So, but yeah. Anyway, I appreciate you guys showing up. Again, if we have some cool new merch, you can find it. There's a link to my website. It's on there. And if you enjoyed the reading, hate to say it, but you can always throw me a cup of coffee if you'd like. There's a buy me a coffee link. And anyway, that's all for this evening, and I do appreciate you guys showing up as always. It was a pleasure. Mike says Michael O'Brien, Corey. Yeah, okay. So here's the thing, Corey hasn't. It's never been a big seller, but everybody who reads it loves it. And I finished book 6, and I kind of tied it up so that it could be the end of the series, but I left it open in case I want to write more. And it's seriously one of my worst. It is my worst selling series, and I don't like. I love the story myself, but in audio, you guys have just swung it right. You guys just love it. You're people are listening more to Corey than they do to anything else, and I'm getting great reviews for her. And because I loved the series, that makes me really happy. And yes, you guys are Mike. How are you doing, Michael? Okay, yeah, Corey, and all right, Marsha Edwards. Marsha, you're welcome. It was my pleasure, and I'm glad you like Corey too. But yeah, I'm so surprised because everybody's just loving Corey, and it makes me happy. So now I'm debating whether or not I want that 6th book to be the last in the series. But I also have so many. I've got like 3 new series planned, so that's a thing too. Anyway, I will talk to you guys next week, and thank you again so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Good night. My mouse quit working. I figured that. There it is. Have a good one.